Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the video from the TEDx talk. It gives you a really good look at the role of ethics and what they play in society. Now, what I'd like to talk about is ethical behavior in business, because that's always a big conversation, especially when it comes to marketing, because marketing has had this aura that we somehow do things to trick people. We somehow manipulate people into doing things they don't want, buying things they don't want. So marketers have to be very aware of the importance of ethics and morals as it comes into play in business. And when you think about morals, we talked about them in a broad source, but usually morals are seen as good or bad. There's a good decision and there's a bad decision. I believe there's basically shades of gray unless you've got a very clear-cut example. Usually in marketing, we're not going to have something as simple as we're killing people, although there have been examples of that. I'll give you a classic one. Back in the 1970s, General Motors had an ethical decision and a moral decision to look at. That they created a pickup truck, the old CK line of pickup trucks, that had the fuel tanks mounted outside the frame rails. Now, 99.9% of the time, this wasn't a problem. However, 0.1% of the time, if one of those trucks was hit on the side in an accident, there was a possibility of the fuel tank rupturing and a fire ensuing. And what General Motors did was they calculated out what was the cost of recalling all those trucks versus the cost of paying out insurance claims and lawsuits to survivors and beneficiaries. And they came to the conclusion that it was cheaper to pay out the lawsuits and the insurance claims. Was that an ethical decision? That's up to you to decide. It was a monetary decision that they had to look at, and they had to factor in ethics because they knew statistically how many people were going to be killed by their actions. But they decided to take that chance. And that's why I'm saying usually in marketing, it's a shade of gray. It's not an absolute. So we've got morals. They're usually good or bad. Killing people, bad. Helping people, good. We need to see them more as a shade of gray. But what the best part of morals is it really helps us figure out if somebody's conforming or is deviant from everything else. So if you think of Harley Davidson, for example, here's a company whose entire business is essentially built upon seeking out people who see themselves as deviant from society. Now, the original Hells Angels were bomber pilots during the First and Second World Wars who really met the definition of Hells Angels. And because they were throwing themselves and putting their lives on the line every day, they had this incredible free spirit about them. They wanted to explore. Now we see people who buy Harleys identify with that. And what they want to do is they want to be seen as one of the last of the outsiders, one of the last cowboys, if you will, riding the open range on their Harley. Now, they're no longer combat-hardened veterans or the criminal element that we've seen pop up in motorcycle gangs. These are doctors and lawyers that are doing this on the weekend. But what they identify with is that deviant behavior. But they don't identify with it all the way. They identify with the good part of it, which is why I'm saying it's a shade of gray. What we have to take a look at is in business, we've got all sorts of morality issues. I talked to you about the General Motors decision. There have been others like that. Ford with the Pinto. If it rear-ended, chances were the Pinto would explode. We saw that with Firestone back in the late 80s, early 90s, actually in the mid-90s, with tires on Ford Explorers, which had the tendency to explode, under certain temperature conditions, causing the vehicle to roll. Now, it turns out that was both a Ford and a Firestone problem, but Firestone ended up in the end taking a big blame for it. What we need to look at is how we bring morality and ethics into business. And we look at three things. We look at pre-conventional morality. Okay? We look at things that are immediate, very childlike. You do something good, you get rewarded. You do something well, you do something good, you get rewarded. You do something poorly, you get punished for it. And if you saw the movie Inside Out, it really dealt with this concept as the child developed. And you saw how they went from very simple emotions to much more complicated emotions as the child got older. Because what happened was they moved from a pre-conventional to a conventional morality system. And under conventional morality, we move towards the expectations of society. What is considered to be good in society? Paying our taxes, working with different civic groups to improve the life of our community. All of those are expectations that we have. Voting is a big expectation that we have. That's part of conventional morality. Then we've got post-conventional morality. And there, we're talking about self-judging over the long run. Are we moral people? If we look back over our lives, are there things that we've done that are not moral? I'm in my 50s. I can tell you there have been things that I've done in my life that are not on the up and up moral side. Now, at the time I did them, I knew that they were a little bit on the dark side of gray, but I still did them because I thought it was for the greater good. But as you look back, you start to judge that with an even harsher light, and you wonder, why did I do that? But we do those things because at the time it seems like a good idea. But as we get older, we realize it's not. Well, corporations are now in kind of this post-conventional morality. We're taking a look at things we've done in the past and going, geez, we shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have exposed the environment to that particular chemical. We shouldn't have clear-cut those trees like we did. And they're trying to make amends for it. And that's really what takes you into post-conventional morality. So how do businesses make ethical decisions? Well, the first thing you want to look at is your top management. Is your top management somebody who talks about ethics, and not just talks about ethics, but demonstrates it on a consistent basis? If the CEO is talking about not doing something, yet is well known to actually do that, that's not ethical. And it's highly unlikely the company is going to respond that way. Now, we've just seen that with Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has just come up with a brand new slogan. We're reinventing ourselves. Well, why are they reinventing themselves? Well, because top management decided they needed a new way to pump up revenues. So they were encouraging employees to get people to take out extra accounts, open new accounts, pick up extra services. And they were bonusing people on that. So they were rewarding them on that. Well, what happened was employees felt increasingly pressured because they were measured quarter over quarter on that. And if they didn't perform, they were out. So they started what I would politely call gaming the system. They started coming up with fraudulent ways of achieving their goals. Now, top management didn't say anything. Top management only cared about getting those results. They didn't ask how. So what she ended up with was an environment where the employees felt it necessary to do things that ordinarily they would not see as morally upright. Okay? So you've got to understand top management's decisions. We're starting to see that question in the airline industry as well, where people are starting to say, the airlines are so concerned about saving money on operations that maybe they're starting to skimp on safety at a time when flying by plane is probably one of the safest modes of transportation. Yet we've had multiple accidents in the last month, whether it's Southwest Airlines, Air China, the Turkish Asiana accident just last week. We've seen that. So one thing we need to look at is when we're making a decision, what are the consequences that we're going to cause, and what's the magnitude of those? How many people will it impact? How many millions of dollars will it cost? And we're forcing managers, especially in the marketing department, to decide how they're going to build products, market products, ship products, and price products so that we're not creating a negative consequence. When it comes to building products, The Europeans are leading the way through regulation in terms of forcing manufacturers to use products that are biodegradable. Okay? So non-structural parts of cars in Europe are now made with fiber that used to be thrown out in the ag process. Usually it's flax fiber, sometimes it's wheat fiber that's pressed into board and used for the headliners or the door liners of a car. We're also using it for underlay and carpeting because it's much more environmentally friendly than using rubber imported from East Asia. We take a look at how do our pricing decisions impact consumers. And we saw that with Mr. Shkreli, who upped the price of a very necessary pharmaceutical product by thousands of percent because he wanted the profits. And the outcry it caused that people couldn't afford it. Governments couldn't afford it. President Trump is constantly talking about how the pharmaceutical companies charge too much for drugs, and we need to roll that back. Well, as the marketer, we need to figure out how do we set that price so we're not seen as taking excessive profits, gouging consumers, putting people into bankruptcy unnecessarily for products they need to survive. We need to look at that. What are the consequences? When it comes to transportation, we're seeing a big interest by transportation companies in the electric vehicles being produced by Tesla and others. Why? Well, because they realize the impact on the environment of having thousands of trucks running around. So they're looking for ways to lower their carbon footprint. Because they know that if they don't do that, two things are going to happen. At some point, government regulation is going to come in, which will make it prohibitively expensive for them, potentially, to ship that way. And if you think about how our society has developed into this delivery-based economy, that's a bad thing. The second thing is, what's it doing to the planet? What are we leaving for our children as we're going forward? Okay? We need to take a look at, is there a social consensus about what we're doing? Does society believe in it? Now, in today's environment, that's tough to determine. But are there a majority of people who believe that we should be doing something? So let's say, for example, that we're developing a new product for children that could help them learn, but it also has a potential of making them addicted to the product or igniting the addiction gene. We'd have to look at, what does society think in terms of bringing that product to market? Do we want to create people who are more susceptible to addiction, but potentially better educated, or should we take the time to look for another method? And then we need to take a look at what's the length of time between our decision and the consequences. Many managers go under the philosophy, look, I'll make a decision and I'll be gone before the consequences hit, so I won't take any of the blame for it. Politicians are very much like that. I spend a lot of time in government, and they never think about the consequences. They only think about the positive announcement that comes up front. It's usually those of us who work in the civil service who tell them, yeah, the second announcement, though, not going to be so good. And that their theory is, hey, look, we're out of here in 4 years. We really don't care. So if it's a really tight relationship, usually you find corporations make firmer decisions. As the decision gets out, you find their moralistic compass tends to waver a bit more because their theory is, I'm not going to be around to face the consequences. Now, we have seen in some professions, and this goes back to the self-regulating side, that some professions go, you can't get away with that. Engineering, for example. If you design a bridge, you're on the hook for that bridge your entire life. Same with architects. So if that bridge collapses and it's because of bad engineering, they're going to come after you in a civil suit. So we do see long-term, not so much in marketing. We don't think about, is that product we're developing today that uses that dye that may cause cancer, okay. We're going to go, yeah, we like the dye. It gives us the color we want. Let's go for it. And, it's going to take 20 years. So by that time, we'll figure out something else out. Okay? That's the way we think. How many people are affected? We take a look at the size of the population being impacted by our decisions. Okay? The more people, generally, the tighter the compass. The fewer the people, generally, the more flexible, because the theory is, we're not talking about a large group of people we're impacting. And last but not least is ethics training. When you get into most companies, they're going to introduce you to their code of ethics. Their code of ethics is probably very common sense like to you. But what it does is it makes you understand exactly what they think is ethical and unethical decisions. So things like accepting payments from suppliers or vendors is usually considered unethical. Going to expensive dinners, considered unethical. Okay, but your company will set that out. It will also set out things like on the HR side, is it ethical to date a coworker or to be in a relationship with a coworker? Many companies frown on that for good reason, but that's more of an HR issue than a marketing issue. The last thing is, and this takes us back to what I talked about earlier, when you go into different countries, you're going to find that ethics might not match exactly with what we do here. So in some countries, it's perfectly acceptable to make a bribe. We have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which says, no, you can't. That we're holding you to the same standard in that country that you're held to in the US. And that's fine. Because if you start doing things that are ethically questionable in another location, it doesn't take long for that to trickle back. But what you have to be aware of is how the ethics in that country work, and then be prepared to work around that area. Okay, now what I want you to do is go and take a look at the video I posted about the Mythical restaurant in London, which amazingly shot up to become the #1 restaurant in that region. And then go and discuss some of the ethical issues you've seen on the discussion board. Once you've done that, come back and we'll talk about corporate social responsibility.